Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. I am your host, Jaclyn Guenette. It's time for the Writers' Corner Live. On the Writers' Corner Live show, we share the backstories from our authors, and today is no exception. So, welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Jaclyn Guenette, and I am going to introduce our awesome author for today. Um, on the Writers Corner live show, what we do is we share the backstories from our authors. And today, our author is Kathryn. And I'm going to waste no time to bring Kathryn onto the show because there's no other person that better positioned to introduce herself than Kathryn herself. Kathryn is also one of the ALS authors. We've been interviewing over the last couple of weeks a number of the Alzheimer's authors, and she'll talk a little bit about that as well. So Kathryn is a business professional turned artist. She wrote and illustrated her debut book called Weeds in Nana's Garden in 2016. And what prompted her to write this book was to help children understand what dementia is about. And it's difficult enough for adults to wrap their heads around dementia and how that affects them. And so she was compelled, because she had children herself, she wanted to write something that would allow children to relate to dementia. And since its publication, her book won several awards and was translated into multiple languages. In 2018, she collaborated with dementia care expert Jaclyn Guenette, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, to launch another book, which is called I Smile for Grandpa. So both of her children's books encourage children to remain connected to family members that have dementia and also supports the Alzheimer Society of Canada. So I'm going to waste no further time but to introduce you to Kathryn.
Hello.
Hi, Kathryn, and a warm welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. So exciting to see your video entry and all those other authors. I'm very thrilled to be here. To be among that group is a real pleasure.
Yes, it absolutely is. So before we get started, you are also one of the ladies involved with ALS authors.
Yes.
So before we get into your book and the story of your book, which I'd love to hear more about, how did you get involved with ALS authors? And tell us a little bit, just very briefly, what ALS authors is about for those who have not heard about it yet.
Sure. So alzauthors.com. It's an online it's a website, which is actually a collection of books and resources about Alzheimer's and dementia. We have the largest comprehensive collection of memoirs, caregiver guides, books about living with dementia, books for children, and books for teens. And I started to get involved with ALS authors because I was invited to participate in their online blog. And the blog that's part of the site has, similar to your Writer's Corner, actually has the story behind the story about books that are written about Alzheimer's and dementia. And I was so overwhelmed by what they were doing on this site, how positive it was, how necessary it is to help people who are caregiving or living with dementia to find resources that after I was part of it as a blogger, I asked if I could be involved and started to use my design and illustration skills to bring some more visual interest and stuff to the site. So I'm the artistic director for the alzauthors.com site. And they're just sorry.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And they're just it's all volunteers. And I started to interact first with Jean Lee, who's one of the founders, and then interacting with some of the other managers. And everyone is just so passionate and all of us work so hard to do this. They're just a pleasure to work with, and they all have hearts of gold and energy like you wouldn't believe. So I was excited to help them, and then now I'm part of the team, and I'm feeling good because we can continue our passion of getting resources into the hands of people that need it about Alzheimer's and dementia.
That is awesome. So I want to dive right in, Kathryn, and ask you about your own journey with dementia, and in particular, so first of all, tell us who it was in your family that had dementia, and tell us a little bit about how the book came about.
Sure. So my mom actually had early onset dementia. She was diagnosed at 62. And it was this strange parallel that was happening, because the year that my mom was diagnosed, I had my second child, my son. So
you were pregnant, or your baby was already born?
We received the diagnosis 2 months after my son was born. But we, right. As I think many people who are familiar with this journey know, we had suspected that my mom had some kind of dementia for a long time. It was just finale in terms of this is what's going on. We didn't know the specific type of dementia. It was early. It was more rapid than many other journeys. So she changed quickly. Once she actually was passed away, we actually had an autopsy to determine what kind of dementia it was. And it was frontal temporal degeneration dementia. So that is a dementia that it changes a bit. It's typically a little bit faster in progress than Alzheimer's disease. And it affects primarily at the beginning your frontal lobe capacities, but it rapidly becomes very difficult to tell the difference between the dementias, which is why we couldn't actually get a firm diagnosis until after she passed away. So
it was quite a rapid progression in her dementia. Oh, did I lose sound there?
For a second.
Hold on a second. Okay. Was there quite a rapid progression of her disease?
Yes. I mean, at the time, you don't really think about it that way. But when I look at it compared to other people that have been on the same journey, from diagnosis to the end of her journey was 7 years. So that's relatively quick, because it can go from that's about on the shortest side. It's typically more like 10 to 15 years. So it was a faster change, which, like anything, it's not good or bad. It's just different than someone who might have a longer journey. Change was rapid. But it was interesting because I had my children growing, which everyone that has children knows, children grow up very quickly and change rapidly. It was a very interesting parallel to have my children changing and growing rapidly while my mom progressed through dementia rapidly. But as a result of being in that position of having young children, I was a part-time stay-at-home mom, and I had part-time help. So, and my mom and dad actually I lived in Toronto, and my mom and dad lived outside of the city. So I wasn't there daily, but I was there several times a week to visit mom. So I was like my objective dad voice, I guess.
So what I want to know is, your children were still pretty young, and so they kind of didn't know grandparents, what they were like prior to the dementia, right? Yeah. So what was it that made you, I'm just trying to ask because your children didn't know anything different. In other words, they didn't see their grandparents change into someone they didn't know. What was it that made you want to write this book to help children better understand the disease?
Even though they didn't know my mom as a healthy, before the disease, they knew their grandfather, and they knew their grandparents on my husband's side. They also knew their friends' grandparents. So right. they knew that their Nana was not like other grandparents.
Right. So they could tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. Because she participated with them in different ways. She was excited about things sometimes that adults weren't excited about. She forgot things that adults normally don't forget. She mixed things up. So it was obvious to them that their Nana was different. So they experienced a different kind of relationship with her. I actually talk about how it was sometimes it was a really amazing pairing, because my young children were accepting of her because they didn't have the comparison. That was just who she was. So they were more accepting of her as someone who might wear something inappropriate, like want to go for a walk with us and not want to change out of her pajamas. That didn't matter to them. So they were
I think she must have been like a cool granny from that perspective.
Right. She was a bit more carefree and spontaneous. She would dance to, I know that many people that have a dementia journey know how important music is. So music for my mom was so huge. And my kids had, you have music on their toys, and there's music around a lot. And a lot of times when you have little kids, you play like songs like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and some of the old familiar. So my mother would sing those really loud because she would know them. And the kids were like, hey, this is cool. Like someone's actually dancing and singing to this music. So yeah, and they weren't, for me, they were kind of like my support, because they were just like going with it. And I still remember my daughter telling me, it doesn't matter what Nana wears when we go for a walk. Like, and it's like, yeah, why am I worried about it? So that, I guess, I really found them helpful to have as part of our team.
So did having your children kind of help you write how to deal with it? And what are the angles that you use in the book to help children come to understand dementia?
Yeah, I actually have to give kudos where kudos is due. And the whole idea for Weeds in Nana's Garden was from my daughter, who was 7. When she and my mom had a beautiful garden, huge garden. It was in garden shows.
I was going to ask you, where did the name Weeds in Nana's Garden come from? But I think you kind of will weave that into your answer now.
Yes. So my mom had a massive garden. When she progressed, it started to fail and nobody was caring for the garden. It was kind of the last thing to worry about. But because it was such a big place and so well made, I guess, there was still lots of blooms in the garden. So we would walk in the garden and always pick bouquets. My mom was always of the mindset that if you had flowers in the garden, you should pick them so you can enjoy them in your home. So we would walk in the garden. One day we walked in the garden with my daughter, and there was weeds in the garden too. And after we picked a bouquet and we were in the house arranging it, my mom I think she was just not in the room, but so my daughter was in the room and she made the observation, Mom, it was harder to find the flowers. Like there's not as many flowers in the garden anymore. And I said, yes, it's true. And then I had the opportunity then to kind of talk about what was happening and the changes, and that her grandfather was busy with looking after Nana more. And I had an opportunity to talk a little bit about that it was a disease in her brain that was changing her. And it was my daughter that made the connection. She said, so Nana's brain has something growing in it and it's affecting how she can remember. And I said, yeah, that's and she's like, it's like the weeds in the garden that are hiding the flowers.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. How perceptive of her. Yes. How old was she at the time?
She was 7. And I said,
very perceptive. Wow.
Right. So that was like, what? Wow. Yes, that is exactly a way to describe it. And it was that moment that I knew I had a book. I knew I had an idea for a book. And I'd already wanted to write a book because I felt that I like stories when kids are 7, 5, 6, 7, stories can so help you explain things to your children and help them understand. And I found very limited books at that time. So that was really an aha moment for me.
So what age is that book aimed at?
It's sort of a 6 to 9-year-old would be the sweet spot. So, because it's a picture book, so still interested in reading picture books, and it's a sort of a poetic style to rhythmic style of reading, and pretty descriptive, and also really, well, I like to say, a candid discussion about it. So a lot of the books that I found before I wrote this book, they kind of tippy-toed a little bit around it. And because we had this beautiful metaphor of the brain being affected the way weeds affect a garden, the book actually talks about it so that it has a visual representation of what is happening in the brain, and explains it so that it goes beyond just that she's got this, and actually tries to explain what that means.
Oh, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And did you write the book while your mum was still alive, or did you write the book after she had passed?
I did write it afterwards. So I had the idea, a general story, and then I wrote it after she passed. So in 2010. And had lots of time to work on it. From the Writer's Corner, the process took a long time to get it together.
How long did it take you to write the book? And did you find that the book was therapeutic in a sense for you?
Oh, yes. So 6 years it took from my mom passing to publishing it. And yes, definitely therapeutic, and sometimes almost so emotional I couldn't work on it. But I did have an amazing thing happen to me, which is my children were continuing to grow, and I shared what was happening with my children's teachers, and with also some teachers that I knew. And I was invited into 2 classrooms of grade 4s, so they were 9-year-olds. And we took the book, which was in its preliminary stage, and I shared it with them. And we had huge, long discussions with all these, 39-year-olds. Some of them had experience with dementia. Some of them had no experience with dementia. And we worked through the book, actually, as a group. And that really solidified where I was going to go. And there are so many questions. And it was as a result of those 2 sessions that I decided to put questions and answers in the back of the book that are specifically identified by what the children were asking me about dementia.
I think that's wonderful because, children are by their very nature very inquisitive, and so they have questions. And so if you can, have a Q&A, I think that's extremely valuable. So how did you go from Weeds in Nana's Garden to I Smile for Grandpa, and what is essentially the difference between the 2 stories?
Sure. So when once I published Weeds in Nana's Garden, I guess it was about a year later, I was approached by a lot of people. Well, actually, the first thing that everyone has said after I published Weeds in Nana's Garden is, when are you going to do a book for a grandfather figure? So it seemed like, yeah, because obviously a lot of individuals are grandparents. You've got the grandfather and the grandmother. So that was kind of like right off the bat, when is that book coming? When is that book coming?
Yeah.
And I was busy with this one, but then Jaclyn, who is actually a dementia care expert, she's a social worker, and she works in care homes in Edmonton, Alberta, which is also in Canada, but long way away, like hours away from here. She approached me through email and said, I've got a book idea. And so she sent me her draft manuscript, and it was bang on. And so we worked together for the next year and a half. And I did the illustrations with her, and we created this other book. The focus was to make not only a book for a grandfather figure, but one of the key feedbacks about Weeds in Nana's Garden is everyone would love to have a book that is even more culturally diverse and accepted, so that people of diverse cultures and backgrounds find the book is the right book for them. And I've had Weeds in Anna's Garden translated into Portuguese and German and French. So I know there's a global need for the book. So what Jaclyn and I decided with this book is to make it animal figures rather than people figures, so that it is a wider range. Yeah. So
I've got a question for you. Many people have gone through journeys like these in their life, and every one of us has got a book in them. And, you know, I am intending to write a book about my journey. I've been through so many journeys with people in my life that I've cared about tremendously, and significantly my late mom-in-law, and more recently my dad. And like you know, my dad's just recently passed, and I've started writing down my thoughts and, you know, little details that I know I don't want to forget, but I'm not ready. I'm just not ready. So how did you get to the point of, I need to write the story and I'm going to write the story? How did you make the transition to put pen to paper?
I think it was because I felt like there was such a need, such an open need to share my story, because I was actually, you know what it was? When I was telling people about my idea, people were always like, oh, well, kids don't need to know about dementia. Oh, just, they don't need to know, you know? And I kept encountering experiences where people wanted to shield the children and not talk about it. And I guess I felt so strongly that that wasn't the way for me, and that wasn't the way for our family. And it helped us so much to have the kids involved and be open and be part of it, that I wanted to do something to not have that happen, to change the perspective.
Yeah, I think that is extremely important. You know, people sometimes forget. Yesterday, I was doing a broadcast, and we accidentally spoke about death and dying. And it's one of those things, you know, when it comes to diseases, illnesses, death and dying, a lot of people feel that the children should be shielded, and somehow children are excluded, and they're not part of the process.
Yes.
And I'm a great believer that we shouldn't exclude the children, because, you know, they wonder what's happening as well. Children intuitively know that something is not 100% right, and children have a harder time translating what they're thinking or feeling into words, and may cause inner conflict. But if you can help them express and understand, it makes for better family life. And so I think what you did is amazing.
Thank you. It was an emotional journey. I actually, like, all candid side, like, I actually had times where I was crying while I was creating the drawings, because they were reflecting my mom and my daughter's relationship. So it was emotional, but take your time, it's okay. And actually, when it's emotional, then I think what you're creating is more real and authentic, and it will speak out from that. But it is a painful process sometimes.
What or who was your support in helping you hold it together so that you could plan and write the book?
Back to those kids of mine. They believed it was important for them. They were the biggest support. And actually my husband was a huge support, and my dad has I know some writers have had, people not wanting to share it and not wanting to show the story to the world, but I didn't have that. I had my dad really excited that something good would happen from Mom's experience, and my kids would be like, come on, Mom, and they were my critics. And so it was a family affair, like the disease is a family affair. It was a family affair to give birth to this book as a result of it. And it's like a tribute to my mom. So yeah.
I think that would probably be the key focus, is focusing on the fact that it's a tribute to someone that you've lost. And it's a way of sharing what you had, and a way of for your children to later look back and, this is the story of their nana.
Yeah.
You've got a legacy that you've basically left behind for your children now.
Yeah, and it's not anything to be ashamed of. It's just it's the story of how we handled it, and then translating that into helping others. It's the best thing I could do for me and for us in our family after what my mom had to go through. So, yes.
So, Kathryn, for anyone that is finding themselves in a situation where they're just newly getting diagnosed with dementia, a parent, for example, what is your advice for them?
To know that there's going to be amazing things that come out of it. It's not the end of anything. Seize the moment, accept that it's happening, don't hide from it, and you will have amazing moments of connection in a different way. It's going to change things, but it's going to bring things together that you've never had experienced. One of my favorite stories is my mom, because I already mentioned she had an award-winning garden. She had actually ran a bed and breakfast, so her home was always perfectly decorated, and at Christmas it was perfectly decorated. But one year, about maybe 3 years into it, we were all decorating the tree, and my mom kind of got a little excited and started throwing the decorations literally on the tree, like just pitching them on the tree. And my 6-year-old son at the time, he looks at mom, he looks at the stuff, and he's like, and he starts throwing stuff on too, like not breakable stuff, but just like ribbons and and it was like all of us started doing it, and then we all stepped back and we're like, hey, it looks kind of cool, like that. That was so fun, and mom would never have done that. Like it was something, I know it sounds like kind of
out of character. Yeah,
it was just, but it was like it freed us, and by accepting that the moment and living in that moment, you get these experiences that you may never have gotten otherwise. So, and we had lots of shares of those.
I mean, if I look at you, the joy in your eyes just telling me that, it created a moment that you will forever remember. It'll be part of your family's legacy. It was a defining moment. Yes. Kathryn, where can people find Weeds in Nana's Garden and A Smile for Grandpa?
They're on all online retailers, but Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, or you can visit weedsinnanasgarden.com, and that website is the website for the book, and on there is a listing of all the sites where it's for sale at. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Kathryn, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing a piece of your family's story and history, and thank you for writing your books to help children understand what dementia is all about. It was fun having you on the show. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone for listening and tuning in and hearing us. Thanks.
It's a big pleasure. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and goodbye for now.
Bye.